Good evening. I'm very happy to be here at Qual 360. It's the first time I'm here. It's 5 o'clock in the evening. You could be thinking of going home or for the dinner here later today. But I'm really pleased you're here just now so I can share this presentation with you. OK, I've been told press down forwards the slides. It works. All right. Did you know that Singapore has the highest penetration of smartphones in the world? And when it comes to 4G speed, it's second only to Korea. So when I was looking at our fresh off the press Connected Life report for some figures that, well, in a way was to prove a point, I thought I'd look at some data on Singapore. And you can see that despite being so into digital, being so connected, television seems to be alive and well. So they're still watching television as well. But they do spend an average of 2.1 hours a day watching online video, an impressive number of connected devices owned. But what I thought was most interesting, the number that really jumped out at me, is that 22% are using ad blockers. And I've been told that that number can be higher in some other markets. So clearly, consumers are becoming very selective about the advertising and the content that they watch. And technology is facilitating this. So whether it's television or online, it's consumers who are in control, and they determine what content they will engage with. In fact, someone said recently that we're very near the time when we will only be able to reach people when they allow us. So no one will deny that when you have a consumer who voluntarily chooses to engage with your content, that person is a great deal more valuable than a consumer who's forced to engage with your content. But as brands, it's up to us then to devise a communication strategy and create advertising and content that is based on human insight and emotion, and is yet innovative enough to strike a spark of interest in a very, very ad-saturated world. With the rise of digital, there is a constant need for fresh stimulation and new news. And with the proliferation of digital channels and brands wanting to be on many of them, to have a presence on many of them, the pressure on the marketer to generate huge amounts of content on an almost ongoing basis is terrific. So what we need is to deliver and produce effective content. We really need to make sure that the kind of content we're producing is authentic, relevant, and talkable, to use or to steal the Unilever art framework. But we also need ways in which we can very quickly help to generate this content and evaluate ideas and concepts so that what finally comes through really is engaging. Very importantly, we have to be sure that we're talking to the right consumer in the right way. Again, because of the rise of digital, we're now able to talk to very specific audiences, niche audiences, and sometimes we don't really know enough about them because in the past we've been really catering to very mass audiences. And there is a need to explore them and see what is relevant to them. We've always been talking about cultural sensibilities and cultural fit. We had some people today talk about that as well. And again, we need to make sure that the content we're producing is actually appropriate for the local and cultural sensibilities. And thirdly, things move so fast. Technology changes, ways of doing things change, social behavior changes. We have to present a consumer context that is up to date and that is appropriate. So all this has to be kept in mind when we're generating that content that we want our consumers to actively engage with. So how does a brand address the challenge of producing advertising and content for consumers whose expectations have fundamentally changed? Now, we believe one way of doing this is to actually embed consumers into the early stage of the creative process. And we're very fortunate that technology actually allows us to do this through online communities. And that really is what I want to talk about today. So I'm presenting Think Tank, which is one of TNS's most successful qualitative digital tools. Unilever fondly calls it the TNS Content Incubator. And the objective of the think tank really is to generate content that deeply resonates with consumers. What it is using an online community in a very refreshing and bespoke manner to generate creative ideas. It could be activation ideas, it could be content. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of the process and show you how it works. So the first stage is discover. Whichever segment, whichever set of consumers we're talking to, we do need to understand what's happening in their lives. So the exploration phase could be of discovering what unmet needs they have perhaps, or what their relationship is with a particular category, or what is the latest in hairstyles and what are their aspirations in that direction. It's purely exploratory, but it is to expose or generate territories that have potential for ideation. The next stage, develop, is the actual co-creation stage. And there we build on these territories to come up with, it could be brand messaging, it could be activation ideas, but that's the actual creative phase. Distribute is about saying, all right, so we have these ideas, but what are the best channels in which to get these ideas out into that marketplace? In China, you say, should it be through WeChat or should it be through signboards in subways? An idea has an appropriate channel for it, and distribute is about identifying those. And finally, diagnose. When we have several ideas, can we use this online community of creative consumers to shortlist, to prioritize, to refine? That's the diagnose stage of the process. So where can we use this kind of an approach? We can use it at various stages of creative development. It could be a completely blue sky approach. I really don't know anything. I want to talk to my consumers, but I'm starting from ground up. That's an appropriate time. We could do a slightly longer exploratory stage to look for territories that are fertile, that have a lot of potential. Alternatively, we could come in at a slightly more intermediary stage, at the planning and development stage. We have some ideas, but we want to refine them, to fine-tune them, to get more ideas perhaps. And it could be brand activation ideas. It could be sometimes new product ideas. So a lot in that space. And finally, at the execution stage as well, where you have your big brand idea, you know pretty much the theme that you want, but you might want a whole series of executions along this theme that you want to present in the digital space or in a campaign. It might be useful at this stage to actually also talk just for a moment about where would such an approach not be appropriate. I'd love to say you could use this for anything, but the fact is you can't. So if you want a project to understand representative consumers, your representative target audience, this really isn't the tool, and I'll soon tell you why. If you're looking for a typical habits and attitudes study, or a brand equity study, or even a diagnostic study among your representative consumers, this isn't the approach, because this online community approach that we use is with creative consumers. It's what we call prosumers. They're leading edge. They're not necessarily representative in terms of possibly socioeconomic group. They will be category relevant. I mean, we wouldn't do something on, for instance, infant formula on singles who have no knowledge whatsoever about what looking after a baby is all about. So they are in the right demographic in the sense of age. They would be the right gender, but not necessarily the same or relevant socioeconomic group. And definitely one very important characteristic is that they are creative. So instead of telling you just about the process, I thought what would be good is to actually take you through a few case studies to show you what we were able to deliver with it. Now, we launched this product, I think, in the middle of last year. And the company that perhaps was most excited by it and gave us the greatest opportunity to try this out and to deliver, well, I think, interesting results for them was Unilever. And of all the markets, the market that adopted it most strongly, again, was China. So my very first case is for Comfort, which is the #1 Fabcon brand in China. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background to that case. So in 2014, the Fabcon category was pretty stagnant. And by 2015, it was actually in decline. In addition, the brand team felt that young people really didn't seem to have a relevance for the category anymore. There had been a certain amount of upgrading from laundry powder to laundry liquid, and they thought that with that upgrade, they don't need Fabcon anymore. Also, the younger generation seemed to feel that Comfort was rather an old-fashioned sort of brand, so there was no engagement with the brand either. There was another interesting fact in the context, which was that while globally the weight was towards advertising on television, in China, the team was aware that many young people were getting their brand information through digital and other media channels, not exclusively television. So they were really keen to come up with some kind of content, some kind of brand messaging that is not, that really is an interaction with the brand, a two-way conversation, not just one-way sort of where consumers sit passive and we beam out stuff to them, and that was focused on the digital space. So the key objectives that the brand team had was really to educate the consumer about the relevance of Fabcon to their clothes and obviously make them want to use it. And at a brand level, really increase the appeal of the brand for younger people. And they wanted to create content that would be deployed in sort of media that was relevant to this audience, and as I said before, brand conversations rather than monologues. Now, they already had a digital creative team who had come up with the idea that clothes matter as the brand idea. Clothes matter, and you should care for what you love. Clothes matter to you, so you should care for what you love. But the brand team wasn't really happy with that, and they said, look, we need to understand, do consumers engage with this? What does it mean to them? You know, what can we do with this as an idea? And what we did was went back to the art framework that I mentioned before, and we said, look, I think perhaps what this needs to be most of all is authentic. And we can't be that unless we understand what is the relationship consumers have with their clothes. What do clothes mean to them? And what are the situations in which clothes are more important than at other times? And then change the lens perhaps and say, okay, so if this is our relationship with clothes, what do we give back to clothes? And what are the tensions in that relationship? So that was where we started our community. And we found out what are the occasions when clothes are important. Are there times when those clothes let us down, primarily because we had failed to care for them? And you know, how do they feel? What was the emotion behind that? So we really understood this world of clothes and clothes care and the relationship people had with clothes. Where we ended up was what you might think is a small change, but it achieved two very important things. What we ended up with is not clothes matters, which was our starting point. We ended up with clothes care matters, and then are your clothes backing you up or holding you back? And what it did was two things. on the one hand, it put the consumer at the heart of this idea. It was about them and what clothes were doing for them, not just clothes in the abstract or just clothes. The other thing that it did was that it linked directly to the category and therefore finally to the brand, because it was about the caring of clothes. It was not just about buying designer clothes because clothes are important. So that made a huge change. A whole series of subjects was created for digital using this idea. And many of those stories actually came from consumer stories that emerged during this online community exercise that we did. And one particular copy, the office copy, and I'm going to show you that, ranked #1 in pre-testing results. It got a super green, and the client was really thrilled with that. And many of those stories were about those pain points, times when clothes had let them down, how they felt. It could be an important client meeting. Somebody spoke about a wedding. And all those found their way into the digital space. For us, the icing on the cake and the cherry on top was when this particular copy, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute, worked so well in digital that in a reversal of usual practice, it finally ended up on television. So instead of television then coming up with subjects for digital, it was a digital content piece that finally ended up on television. And we were really excited by that. Take a look. Okay, so that worked really well because that young man really lost face at his client meeting when his clothes had shrunk and weren't looking terribly great. And it did extremely, extremely well for the brand. We didn't stop there, however, because then we also had a huge number of pieces on social media involving celebrities, something about their clothes choices, clothes for different occasions. And all in all, it did lead to a revival of the brand. So that worked extremely well. Engagement rates were they say, quadrupled, and they were really pleased with that. The next case I want to talk about, again, is a China case. I told you they were the first to jump onto this bandwagon and use this tool a lot. It's also in China, but for a very different category. It's for ice cream. Now, in China, Cornetto, I think Cornetto talks to young people and about love pretty much around the world. But in China, they were looking to develop a whole slew of new and unique love expressions. What they had been doing was that they'd been creating a whole series of microfilms on love and love expressions. And they'd worked pretty well. They'd been very well received. But now they wanted, again, to do a couple of things. One was to create a whole series of new love expressions, and also to have this collective body of work in the field of love, a whole lot of content, a whole lot of material, so that, at least in the ice cream category, Cornetto would own love. That was their objective. So, sorry. Okay, here we are. So the objective really was to create content that engages with consumers, and remember, these are young teen kind of consumers, and to create all these new expressions, new love expressions and love-based content. And of course, it's not just talking about love, but somewhere we need to introduce the category, which is ice cream, and the brand, which is Cornetto as well. So to completely integrate the brand within these love stories. So when we did the Cornetto think tank, what we achieved were these 4 different, goals, if you like. On one hand, we obtained insights into what love means to young Chinese. For example, we discovered that Chinese youngsters don't believe they are as confident about expressing their interest in a particular person of the opposite sex compared to their Western counterparts. They thought they were a little more bashful about it, and they actually needed a little help in getting them to go and say, look, I'm really interested in you, could we go out, or whatever. So that was interesting. The second thing we did was that while talking to these, our segment of interest was what in China is called the post-95. So they were born in 1995 or later. Though we also talked to post-85s just to get a slightly different perspective. We identified two segments just in their approach to how confident were they about going and expressing love for another person. And we would want to talk to them perhaps differently. The third, the client had a couple of concepts they wanted to throw into the mix and to see how they were received, and we were able to show which one had more potential and therefore the direction that they should follow. But really, the most exciting bit was that we generated 14 different ideas and new love expressions, several activation ideas, one of which came to market and I'd like to share with you. So in May of this year, so it's very recent, in May of this year, one of the ideas that we generated on the think tank came to market, and this is melting love letters. Now, a little bit of sort of how it works is there on the right, but in effect, what you do is you scan the QR code on special edition Cornetto packaging, which takes you to a site which has a template for creating unique love expressions. You can create that, and then it allows you to send it to whomever you do want to send this love expression via either WeChat or QQ. The person receiving it has exactly 520 seconds to read that love expression, and then it melts away. So it was perfect, right? It appealed to teenagers because it was engaging for them. It was very much in the digital space with the mobiles being the center of their lives. It was using their mobiles. And it melted. I mean, what could be closer to ice cream? And it was so successful that this was May. And then by July, we already had figures that said sales had increased by 10.6%. There had been over 340 million impressions. 1.2 million reposts, and a huge amount of buzz on social media where they said, this summer, Cornetto is the way to woo. My third case isn't really quite a case. This is the Lux team in Singapore very recently commissioned two think tanks with us. But the reason I want to touch upon it a little bit is because while for China, I've been talking about wanting to create ideas for the entire target audience for a particular brand. In this particular case, Lux asked us to look at certain niche segments and to give us a little more understanding of how the brand could work with them. One of the segments was Muslim women. The other segment was millennials. The millennials piece is in 3 markets, Brazil, India, and China. And that fieldwork is going on at the moment, so I don't have anything to share on it, I'm afraid. The Muslim piece was done in Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Egypt, and we've just presented it very recently to the client. Nothing's come to market yet. If I get a chance to come here next year, maybe I can share that with you. But for the moment, maybe I'd like to take you through a little bit of what we found. One thing we realized is that the anonymity of an online community is really useful when you're talking to people who otherwise are somewhat guarded in what they might say. They might not want to say something to you face to face, but on an online community, you can have a small sort of stream of consciousness conversation with them, and they can be pretty revealing. And then you can throw some of these stories out into open forum, and you can get really interesting reactions to them. We did discover some of the tensions that young Muslim girls face. So, for instance, their ambitions and their choices can be restricted, which is frustrating. And it could be something like a life choice or a career choice, or just letting off steam. It's not okay to do that. Or huge expectations of feminine perfection at every level. The pressure of having to be on guard all the time. Perhaps they feel more so than others. Now, you might tell me that, oh, but we could probably have told you that without doing research. Or this is true not only of Muslim women, but it's true of other cultures and possibly for women in many other markets. And you would be right. But I think the fact was that we didn't stop there. What we also then went on to look at is, all right, so there are these tensions, and clearly, it's in their minds, because that's why they're talking about it. But how do they cope with that? What do they do about it? And where can the brand find a role to help them with these challenges? And really, that was what we tried to do in the second half of our approach. So what we found, and this was really interesting, that Muslim millennials are not very different from other millennials. They also have their hopes and dreams and aspirations. And they are, yes, they believe that being a Muslim woman has certain challenges, but they are not rejecting their religion. They're extremely proud to be Muslim. They have a deep faith in their religion. They want to adhere to its tenets and to its rituals, but they also want to make the most of themselves. And so really our objective was, how can we help the brand be an aid, a support in some way to help them achieve. So one of the ideas was, for instance, don't expect them to break with convention. They have no wish to be rebels, but they will bend a little bit, and how can we help them do that? Cultivate optimism and positivity. We've been hearing that, and we heard it on our community from our Indonesian participants as well, that if I stay optimistic and cheerful, frankly, it's a better way to cope than telling myself, God, what an awful life I lead. And stay conventional. This is the society and the religion I live in, and it is what I choose to live in, but how can I still make the best of it that I can? And we found roles that the brand could play in all of this. Just 2 more slides, and then I'll let you go. You might ask me, so online communities aren't new. Lots of people do online communities. So what's so special about Think Tank? For one, it's not just another online community, because like I said before, we're not using representative consumers at all. We're using what we call leading edge consumers or prosumers. They are connected, they are future orientated, they are very articulate, they're very creative. And in fact, this has huge implications for recruitment, because we take at least 2 weeks to find our participants for that think tank. And we use the Torrance test to make sure that they are creative to the standards that we want, because we want them to ideate for us. So that's hugely important. Secondly, the creativity isn't, let me see what I can do for the brand, but it's really anchored in a human truth. The consumers tell us about their lives, about their relationships with the category, their relationships with the brand. And so any ideas that come anchored in that human experience. Thirdly, they address live issues. It's not a situation where we say, where's that old HNA study we did 2 years ago? Can we find something there? This isn't even something that was done 3 months ago. It's now. It's this week. So it's really current. So you're not dealing with old data. It's very, very flexible. So you can do it almost anywhere in the world. And I think this is really important. I used to be with a company where we did a lot of face-to-face co-creation. And it worked pretty well, I have to say. But I think the advantage of this is that it is not on-demand, instant creativity. Yes, they come up with an idea, but they can think about it. Tomorrow they can come and say, I found another little tweak that I think will make it even stronger. There's time to mull over it. There's time to reflect. There's time to come up with an even more brilliant idea, because this continues over a week or 10 days, and there is time to do that. And there is client and agency participation, not just as observers, because they can observe the entire community, the entire duration of the community, but at certain stages where important decisions are being made, like we have 5 territories, which 2 or 3 shall we take further? Or which of these ideas do you want to explore in greater detail? Or which ones should we now shove out and, or should we change tack completely? Was our starting point not right? And so agency and client participation is really important. And my very last slide for the day is how can we ensure a successful think tank? And here I think getting a focused brief is really important. I won't talk about scope creep and how the scope of a project can change from start to sort of halfway through the project. But if the client is very clear about what they're looking for, it just makes it that much easier for us to deliver to it. Really good recruitment, I've already spoken about, and I can't emphasize how important that is. A really close collaboration between the client, the creative team, and the research team, because it is together that we get these great results. I've spoken about how creative consumers are really important, but the researcher who's managing the project also has to be creative as well. The assignment plan or the task plan that we use is not just a series of questions that we ask them, but they are engaging tasks and assignments that get us the information we want or get them to create something for us. I think perhaps Sabrina spoke about this when she spoke about her panorama groups this morning. You create tasks that they will work on and therefore create something. So that is a very creative exercise. And also how to pace that through the duration of that online community, and you know, when to push a little bit or when not to. So there's a huge amount that comes from that moderation, and you really need people who can do that. And lastly, being flexible and adaptable. Depending on what comes along, are we okay to change mid-course if necessary, to you know, take off those 3 tasks and put in new ones, but we have to be prepared to that. So I leave you with the idea that using online communities and creative consumers is really quite a powerful tool you should think about. Thank you.